In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down all of the science that goes into building muscle for combat sports. This is going to act as the ultimate guide for combat athletes when it comes to hypertrophy training. So strap in and get ready to transform your game. What's going on? It's Coach Adam from Counter-Strike, where fight science is made simple. We teach combat athletes how to build relentless cardio, unbreakable strength, and eat like a pro so they can dominate on the mats or in the cage. In today's video, we are going to be talking about everything that you need to know as a combat athlete about hypertrophy training, or basically how to grow bigger muscles. I know growing bigger muscles for weight class sports like MMA, jiu-jitsu, boxing, it sounds counterintuitive. And honestly, hypertrophy training isn't for every single combat athlete. But there are a few cases, a few instances where focusing on hypertrophy for a short amount of time can be the difference between dominating in your fight career or falling a little bit short. If you're an athlete that's maybe a little bit smaller for your weight class, maybe you're trying to go up a weight class, maybe you struggle with a decent amount of injuries, or you just want to look like a shredded badass because it's going to build your confidence and give you that mental edge when you step on the mats or in the cage, then you're probably going to want to focus on hypertrophy. So if any of those situations sound like you, then this is the perfect video for you. If you don't fit into any of those categories, that's okay. You are still going to learn a ton. I'm going to be breaking down the 8 keys that every combat athlete needs to build perfect, vicious, lean muscle through hypertrophy training. So here we go. Key number 1 for hypertrophy training as a combat athlete: the phase of the fight cycle. It's very important that any kind of hypertrophy training is performed in the off camp, the time where we have no fights booked, 16 weeks or more away from a fight. The reason for this is because hypertrophy training is very fatiguing. If you've ever had a skill coach or another athlete tell you that fighters shouldn't lift because it'll slow them down, it'll impact their performance, it's because really the only kind of lifting they have experience with is bodybuilding style of lifting, which is primarily hypertrophy training. So hypertrophy training is very fatiguing. It makes the arms feel heavy. You're going to feel a lot of soreness. So if we focus on hypertrophy training in camp or even in the pre-camp, this is way too close to our fight. The added fatigue from this style of lifting is going to be detrimental to your ability to peak. So if we are going to be adding on muscle, then our hypertrophy training should only occur in the off camp. Key number 2 for hypertrophy training in combat athletes is frequency, or how many days a week we are going to lift. For every Counter-Strike athlete that is in a hypertrophy block of training, we have them lift anywhere from 3 to 4 days a week. That's it. Anything less than 3 days a week, it's not going to be enough stimulus to actually cause the muscle to adapt and grow. But anything more than 4 days a week is probably going to be too much. Remember, we're not bodybuilders. Bodybuilders are going to lift 5-6 days a week. But for a combat athlete, lifting more than 4 days is going to be way too much fatigue, and it's probably going to have some negative impact on your skill training. Key number 3 for building muscle as a combat athlete: volume. Volume is the name of the game in hypertrophy training. The number 1 variable that we can progress and focus on to stimulate the most growth is volume. Plain and simple, volume is going to be the reps and sets that you perform throughout an entire workout. So for a combat athlete that's trying to grow some muscle, we want to do anywhere from 1 to 8 sets of 6 to 20 reps per set. So it's going to be a lot of volume. From there, week to week, we either want to progress the amount of sets that we do or the amount of reps that we do. But that progression in volume, like I said, is going to play the biggest role in your ability to grow thicker, larger, stronger muscles. Key number 4 to building muscle hypertrophy training as a combat athlete is the intensity, or how much weight we are lifting with. Having a high intensity or a large amount of weight isn't as important as maybe in strength training, trying to get stronger, but we do have a very specific range that we want to work in. Anywhere from like 60 to 75% of your 1 rep max is probably going to be the best intensity to work in to stimulate the most muscle growth. The biggest key though, when it comes to intensity for hypertrophy training in a combat athlete is working to near failure. We should be close to failure every single time we lift. This is going to stimulate a lot of growth. So we could be doing 3 sets of 10, but if we're doing a lot of sets where we have 4, 5, even 3 reps left in the tank, the weight is probably not heavy enough and you're not going to grow the way that you're looking for. When we perform our sets, we want to choose a weight where we have anywhere from 0 to maybe 2 reps left in the tank. We need to be very close to failure, especially in the 3rd or 4th week of a training phase. The more failure and the more fatigue that we can accumulate through the hypertrophy training that we're doing, the thicker and larger our muscle is going to be able to grow. Key 5 for hypertrophy training in a combat athlete is tempo, or the time under tension. How much time is that muscle that you're trying to grow spending underneath of the bar, the dumbbell, the cable, the weight that we're using? Are you going fast and rushing through every rep? Are you going slow and controlled? If you followed any kind of like bodybuilding, like everybody knows Arnold, obviously, he's big on mind-muscle connection. Anytime that you've heard a bodybuilder or any kind of athlete talk about mind-muscle connection, this is typically what we're talking about. We want to go slow and controlled, especially during that eccentric or that lowering part of the movement. We want to really feel the muscle. We want our mind to be in that muscle. We should feel every fiber contract, slow and controlled. This is going to create a lot of heat, which is going to create a lot of damage, which is going to provide the stimulus that is necessary to encourage our muscle to grow, to get thicker and larger and stronger so we can dominate on the mats or in the cage. Key 6 to hypertrophy training as a combat athlete, rest. How much do you want to rest in between our sets of training? On the Counter-Strike system, we have our athletes that are focusing on hypertrophy rest anywhere from 30 to 120 seconds. That being said, it's very rare that we have an athlete rest for more than a minute, unless we're really just killing them with a drop set or a failure set. They're probably going to rest anywhere from like 45 to 60 seconds. The reason we want the rest so low is because we are trying to get our athletes to failure. Like we talked about earlier, the more damage, the more heat, the closer to failure that we can get in our working sets, the more we are going to be able to stimulate that muscle to grow. So we do not want the muscle to be fully recovered set after set. We want an incomplete rest. There's still a little bit of fatigue going into the next set, so we can encourage that growth. We can create the right kind of heat, create the right kind of damage to cause the muscle to grow thicker and larger. The 7th key, the penultimate key when it comes to building hypertrophy as a combat athlete is specificity. And in this case, when I'm talking about specificity, I'm talking about exercise selection. Making sure that we are selecting exercises that are directly targeting the muscles that we want to grow for combat sports. Like we talked about before, we are not lifting like bodybuilders. A bodybuilder's approach to hypertrophy is trying to be as symmetrical as possible. So they're going to work all of the muscles in their body so they can create evenness and symmetry. This is not the case for a fighter. Every athlete's different, but for most combat athletes, we want to focus on growing our posterior chain or our back muscles, like our traps, our upper back, our lower back, our glutes, our hamstrings, and our triceps. The reason this is so important, the first, is because we spend most of our time in our anterior chain or the front of our body, especially as a combat athlete. We're here a lot, right? We're rounded when we're striking. Maybe we're in the bottom of the guard as a grappler. We're very forward. We're very active in the front side of the body. And because of this, we tend to be weaker in the back of our body. This can cause some injury and some imbalances as well, which could be detrimental to our performance. The other reason training our posterior chain is so important is because those back muscles, especially our hamstrings, our glutes, our lower back, they are going to contribute the most to our ability to be strong and powerful. So if we can grow those muscles larger, then there's going to be more potential for force output, which means more power, which means we're going to be able to dominate in a more devastating fashion. And the 8th and final key to hypertrophy training as a combat athlete is your calorie intake. You can do all the training in the world, but if you are not eating enough food to actually allow your muscle to repair, then it's never going to grow. The key to eating for hypertrophy training is eating more than we burn in a given day. The amount of calories that we burn in a day is called our total daily energy expenditure, or our TDEE. So the first step to understanding how much you need to eat for hypertrophy training is calculating your TDEE. There are a few calculators that are out on the internet, but if you want me to make a video explaining how you can calculate your TDEE, let me know in the comments down below. If I get enough people to comment down there, I'll make that video for you. But once we understand what that TDEE number is, then we simply add 250 to 500 calories to that number, and that's how many calories we need to eat in order to grow our muscle. For example, let's say my total daily energy expenditure is 3,000 calories. From there, I'm going to eat anywhere from 3,250 calories to 3,500 calories in order to stimulate the growth of my muscle. So there you have it, my 8 keys to building muscle hypertrophy training as a combat athlete. If you're trying to go up a weight class, if you're smaller for your weight class, you're struggling with injury, or you just want to look like a badass, then this is your ultimate guide. I hope that you got a lot of information out of it. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe as well. Let me know in the comments down below, what other videos do you want me to make for strength, conditioning, nutrition for combat athletes? And if you want to learn more about what a combat athlete should be doing in the weight room, check out my playlist somewhere up there on the other videos that I have specifically for lifting for combat athletes right on this channel. I'll catch you next time.